going to marry him.
From that moment on, my life was ruined.
He has a handsome face. It suits my plan. I'm not denying you the freedom to see your mistresses even after marriage.
You'll know I'm different, and I won't cheat on you.
In a previous life, I married a prince who turned out to be a monster. He abused me and brought contagion from women. Plus, I lost several children to disease. I cut life short by making the prince the first man in history to drive his wife to suicide. Turned out my mission wasn't over.
One day 17 years ago, she will have to marry the most handsome man in the world. When a 6-year-old girl pointed her finger at him, holding that lifeless gaze, his life began to fall apart. She thought all noble families were the same. So, the only thing that caught her eye was his face. Inside, the girl acted so eerily confident that his heart began to beat harder. Her name was Inés Filistina de Perez. She belonged to one of the highest-ranking families of the Grandes de Ortega, an alliance of 17 noble families to whom the emperor had granted peerage titles. And this girl was the one and only daughter of the Duke of Villestena, and the one who rejected the prince of the empire and refused to be a princess. So revered and intelligent could have chosen any of the many suitors, but her choice fell on the heir of Escalante. And the reason was his beauty. Only he should not forget that she didn't like him at all. That's what she said at the time. And yet now Ines was leaving him. But how could he know what his motives were? She had become a sunshine. And now it did not matter so much what sorrow might be hidden in her past or their future, but Carcel would stand here forever waiting for her. He longed for the girl to love him too, as he had loved her all along. So loud clattering was accompanied by the shouts of the heroine. She was asking Lord Carcel to stop, which she actually did. So without turning around, the man listened to her plea for help. The Countess was complaining of extreme dizziness. The girl's cheeks turned pink, but she dared not raise her eyes to him. The stranger did not know what to do, for there were only them, the weak ladies. Her hands were tense as if she were embarrassed or afraid of something, according to her guesses. The Countess was only experiencing simple dizziness, which had happened before. She should have rested in silence for a while, but her residence was on the very outskirts of Mendoza. Suddenly, a shadow hovered over her, causing her to freeze. Lord Carcel smiled and silently watched her while the girl became convinced of his beauty. The son of the greatest noble family in Ortega, and also the most attractive man in Mendoza. The guy called her his lady, causing her to burst out in embarrassment. The girl apologized, continuing to babble about how they weren't expecting a gentleman from whom they could seek help. But not a soul passed by, no matter how long they waited, which was why they were so greatly relieved when he appeared. 3 more female figures could be seen behind her, 2 of whom were supporting the girl who was feeling ill. The Lord put on a satisfied face, as this was indeed an urgent matter. She was honored to know that a gentleman like him was protecting the waters of the empire. The Countess, whom the man carried in his arms, had heard that his grandfather had devoted his life to the service of Ortega, and Lord Carcel had decided to follow in his footsteps. It was also rumored that he wanted to continue the noble work of his family. Upon hearing this, she was quite shocked. After all, the lad was the heir of the Escalante family, and the Nunera Sea was still a dangerous place where battles were fought. But Admiral Calderon's victory was enough to bring peace, but the pirates still caused so much trouble every year. The Lord, on the other hand, being a member of the Grandes de Ortega, had already learned that with his power came great responsibility. His grandfather had always told him that to hold an honorable position, it was necessary to have the willingness and acceptance of that responsibility. The Countess allowed herself to pounce upon him with a kiss, but the man did not respond to it. An alliance of 17 noble families, whom the Ortega imperial family had honored with titles of peerage. But even among them, the Escalante family was considered the best of the best. The heir was a man whose incredible looks were the envy of all. It was as if he was truly blessed by the Almighty. By the time he was 15, Lord Carcel was spending time in the company of all the ladies who had come of age. By 17, he was followed everywhere by admirers, and in 20 he began to get acquainted with more mature and insignificant women. His insatiability knew no bounds even in his youth. Carcel Escalante de Espasa, now aged 23, was in the prime of life. And even now, the lad decided to take advantage of the situation. After all, he hadn't signed up for this, however, it was hard to think about it now. Why had the Lord even agreed? After all, this woman was too easy. The The Countess realized that it was about his fiancée. In her opinion, the girl was not good enough for him. Of course, she had roots in a noble family and she belonged to the House of Valestani after all. Except that she always had such a bored and uninterested look about her. The Countess didn't understand how she could behave like that in front of such a perfect fiancé. It was as if Carcel had had an epiphany, for now he, too, thought it was too much. Being in the arms of this frivolous lady, the guy saw something interesting. Specifically, a girl with a blank stare. She was the one they were talking about. 17 years after the date of betrothal, Inés Valestena de Perez first became aware of his infidelity. Everyone looked at her and whispered, calling Ines a nun. In their eyes, the girl behaved too arrogantly in front of the other noble ladies, and all of them wished to tell Lord Carcel about it. Riding in his carriage, he made sure that she heard these words and was just on his way to the residence of the Duke of Valestena. Once married, a man should not let any woman near him except his wife. However, the Lord already had so many women that he didn't care about that. All the model of family life in high society, when adultery was not frowned upon, was long outdated, and adultery was forbidden even after death. In that case, Carcel planned to have a lot of fun before the wedding. At least since he was destined to spend his life as a monk, he wouldn't have any regrets, and all his dalliances would soon be behind him. The Lord stormed into the room where Inés was sitting. He had no other choice. The girl nodded in greeting, assuming the man had a reason to see her. Even the servants could sense the tense atmosphere. In fact, he had wanted to meet not only yesterday, but 3 days ago as well as 2 weeks ago. Inés explained that it was pouring like a bucket, and she didn't want it to be a problem for him. It was an expected reaction after the scene that presented itself before her. But the girl had never ignored him like that before. Carcel understood how she felt that day. But mentally, he still blamed her for the fact that he would have to live the rest of his life like a monk. However, Inés pretended not to understand what he was trying to say. She had changed his life with the flick of a finger, so to call this woman submissive would not turn her tongue. But Carcel felt that Inés Valestena loved him. She had chosen him for love, giving up the highest title and the legal right to marry a member of the imperial family. She had had plenty of opportunities to make things right, but she had missed them all. 17 years ago, or now, doesn't matter because the heroine waited out of love, still in the same place. But that had always been the problem. The girl had the feeling, yet Carcel didn't share it one bit, causing the guilt to constantly torment him. He wanted to explain everything, but Inés had seen it with his own eyes, so that was enough. And if she got it right, there was nothing scary about it. That was exactly what the man was surprised about. He became unlike himself, losing any confidence, because the girl didn't even yell at him. Inés wasn't even upset, though. Carcel denied it, referring to the fact that she had refused to see him for 2 weeks. As it turned out, the girl didn't want that because of the rain, since her fiancé might get wet on the way here. Of course, she found such bickering very tiresome. They weren't close enough to have this kind of dialogue, and this was not about 1 or 2 women with whom Carcel had had an affair. Did he really think she didn't know about anything? Inés was not angry, as the Lord was free to be with whomever he wished. He couldn't get his head around it. After all, they were supposed to have a wedding soon. It didn't mean to her that they should lose their freedom right now, though. Moreover, they weren't married yet, so Inés would let him do as he pleased. The guy thought it was a joke. However, she wasn't saying all this because she was so understanding. The girl did not limit him in his actions because Carcel was indifferent to her. His heart began to pound frantically, which made that horrible sound in his ears. That summer, he turned 23. That's when she told him that everything he believed was a lie. As a little boy, Carcel asked how many years equaled life, which made everyone laugh. He was annoyed at this until suddenly someone behind his back asked him if he knew the meaning of the word. It was Inés, who already recognized the answer. The kid was embarrassed, but still kept saying that he knew everything. The girl asked for an explanation, but he lowered his head and blanched. The little girl rushed sharply to the man whose full copy she was, and wanted to know if she really had to talk to this Lord Carcel. Hay, on the other hand, had sweat beading on his face, as if he were nervous. Inés was much smarter than her peers, and this she understood perfectly well. It was Duke Lionel Valestena. The man proceeded to moralize that the girl should not ignore those who were not as smart as she was. Carcel, on the other hand, seemed to think they thought he was a dullard. However, the girl didn't need friends, and besides, the Lord was her fiancé, not her friend. The Duke sighed heavily, trying to get the idea into her head that Inés should have been even kinder to him. However, the The girl was indeed bright, for she realized the badness of her character. But even so, she was still a lady. Eanes turned sharply to Carcel, which made the boy shiver. She explained that only a dead man could answer him how long life had been. The lad turned white altogether, deciding that dead people could talk. However, that was not the case. For that reason, none of the living knew the answer. The dead man knew it because he had gone through death. However, Carcel had learned of it about 4 months ago. Life was the time they had before death, so when a person died, it would end. Even so, the Lord could count and know how long his life would last. The lad wallowed in his world of thoughts, wondering how he would die. His grandfather's leg began to corrode me after he was shot in Nuniera. Did that mean he would lose his leg too, or something? Ines mumbled that his grandfather had lived over a decade since he lost his leg. Now Carcel was confused at all. He was afraid that he would have to share the same fate, and if not, then he would have to marry her. His tears were dripping off his red face, but even so, the guy was awfully cute. Everyone was bantering and trying to figure out what had happened, while Ines freaked him out more by mentioning that they would have to make a baby as well. The truth was that it might not last a lifetime. A smile lit up her face at that phrase. She was talking about their marriage, and now they could raise their glasses to Carcel Escalante de Esposa and Ines Valentina de Perez, who would be married upon reaching adulthood. Thanks to this beautiful couple that has been together all their lives, the union between the two families will only be strengthened. Spins will become the lady of the Escalante family, and Carcel will become the son-in-law of the Valestena family. And to the joy of the imperial family, they will devote themselves to each other for the rest of their lives. It was from that day on that his life began to fall apart. Someone still couldn't understand why it was him. It was Oscar Valenza de Ortega, crown prince and cousin of Carcel. The guy looked at the little guy who didn't understand anything. Oscar asked him to strain his meanderings and try harder. When he grew up and became emperor, would Carcel also stare at him in response to his question? It seemed to him that the Lord had done something to Lady Valestena, even though he was only 6 years old. That was what it was all about. How dare a 6-year-old cousin be so devious? He'd only just turned 10 himself. Oscar called the girl his. He couldn't accept that Carcel had dared to steal his master's property. The boy sizzled him with his angry gaze. Oscar would not punish him, however, since the Lord was his uncle's son, but it was assumed that their alliance would be for the good of the imperial family. When Ines refused the crown prince's offer and chose Carcel instead, it was Empress Cayetana who brought him to the girl as if she had been waiting for it. She never once asked the little girl why she had defiantly refused the emperor's son. On the contrary, in letters, the woman kindly persuaded her to make her own choice. Cayetana was supposed to maintain an alliance with House Valestina, but she certainly did not favor the sullen girl. The empress needed Ines, but did not believe she was worthy of her son. Oscar knew she had turned him down and chosen a fool like Carcel, though the Lord himself thought the crown prince liked the girl, for he wanted her so much. The guy called Ines a crow and laughed, since the desire to possess and sympathy are two different things. Oscar wanted to marry her, but that didn't mean he loved her. It just so happened that her bloodline was best suited for marriage. Either way, he wanted to visit this crow. There was still plenty of time before they would grow up, and when the meeting took place, Oscar was brimming with pomp and cunning, and, in contrast, Carcel was devastated. In fact, it seemed to him that the girl hated the crown prince with all her soul, which Oscar was immediately able to sense. He definitely had a knack for picking up negative energy. Ines explained that it was customary to give at least a week's notice of a visit, but it seemed that His Highness had considered a visit to her estate such an extraordinary convenience that he had left proper etiquette unheeded, and as a result, they had failed to receive her as befitted. Oscar had said that an apology between them was unnecessary. However, she was still not prepared for the visit, much to her embarrassment. The crown prince shot his eyes up, repeating that there was no need to prepare anything. He didn't come to see the duke or duchess, but her. The kid didn't seem to catch on to what she was talking about at all. Ines thought the meeting would have gone much better if the time had been right. Carcel wondered how he could ignore her words so much. His Highness wanted to chat about the book she had provided, which he had reread a few days ago. His love for books was a serious problem for him, as he lacked time at times to learn how to run the empire. Ines decided that she should not have advised him about the book. Oscar, on the other hand, said it was nonsense because discussing these informative topics with her was always one pleasure. After all, the existence of intellectuals like them can be so lonely. They forever have to put up with the ignorance of the masses. What he was saying was truly ridiculous. However, whenever Oscar saw Ines, he felt like he could finally breathe. Most likely, Carcel had yet to experience the pain experienced by people like them. The Crown Prince had told her that it would be hard for a girl to meet someone of equal intelligence other than himself, so there was no risk involved. He gave her the chance to make the right decision. In the name of the imperial family Ortega, Oscar asked her to marry him. However, she didn't like the guy one bit. These words made him freeze as he continued to listen. It was for this reason that she refused him. He was overwhelmed by the anger that was accumulating in his clenched fists. Oscar wanted to know the reason, but suddenly Ines asked Carcel to come to her because he was her fiancé and therefore had to protect her. However, the Crown Prince did not want his intervention. The heroine continued to talk to the Lord, alluding to the inconvenience the Crown Prince had caused her. Oscar, on the other hand, believed that this had nothing to do with the children, since the negotiations were conducted by adults. But he did not consider the fact that Lady Ines was 6 years old. However, she was nothing like Carcel. The guy made a spectacle of the difference between want and like, but he did seem to like the girl. The little girl hid behind her fiancé's back, which caused a violent reaction from both of them. Now, Oscar guessed what kind of game his cousin was thinking about. The Crown Prince thought the Lord intended to disrespect him. He had warned him, after all. He wanted to believe that Ines didn't mean it, as if she found herself unworthy, for the lad would one day rule an entire empire. However, the protagonist had heard enough. His Highness would not give up, for he wished she would endow him with wings, and then they would both rule Ortega. His shouts gave her a headache, but Carcel still continued to stand in a stupor. The boy wished he could stop this torment because he no longer wanted to come between them. Except as Ines had prompted him, Carcel was only 6 years old, so he didn't have a master yet. Probably that was the impetus to take her by the hand and drag her away. The children ran out of the room, but when he inquired if her headache had gone away, the heroine explained that it was an obvious lie. Still remained in prostration, for it now seemed to him that Ines had no fear of death and had therefore lied to the Crown Prince. However, even the imperial family would not dishonor itself by reprimanding the house of Valentina on such an occasion. The Lord had no idea why his cousin liked such a girl. She was a brute, not even in appearance. Maybe a little Ines was cute, but even so he was too good for her. The heroine took a rag and wiped Escalante's hands, making him as red as a tomato. 3 minutes later, he felt like he had been treated like a fool. Carcel noticed that she had not previously called him Escalante. As it turned out, Ines thought he hated her. However, that was not the case. But then why was the Lord crying? He had roared again when the girl had said they would have to live together until death do them part, and how Carcel had cried after her words about having a child. Now the boy was begging her to stop. He didn't understand the reason he was so embarrassed. Ines had agreed to call him by his first name. He'd never had anyone treat him like that in his entire life. She was the only one. Carcel, on the other hand, thought she was strange. After all, Ines liked him. At least that was what they said. But if it were true, she wouldn't have acted that way with him. The boy doubted her sincerity, but otherwise the heroine would not have dared to marry him. Rumors swarmed around Ines according to which she did not understand that to choose her chosen prince was the greatest honor, and that the girl pointed to Carcel because of his pretty face. However, that was the case. She didn't even deny it. The lad was even numb, as if he dreaded it, but would there be anyone who wouldn't like anything cute? Especially when the face could be put to good use. All of those words indicated to him what Ines's opinion of people was. She said she liked him, and yet she was so rude. Didn't she want to impress him? The heroine didn't think long, as she didn't think she lacked anything to do so. However, Ines didn't agree with the idea that in order for someone to like you, you have to change yourself. Her confidence was reflected even in her posture. Carcel didn't have to like her at all. She didn't need to be, but he would only have to remember that she liked him very, very much. And now, as an adult, the protagonist was saying that she wasn't interested in Escalante. That's when he realized that there was something wrong here. The guy wondered, had her feelings for him really changed? She'd always been rather modest, and therefore if she expressed affection, it was through letters, but her devotion had long been known to the whole of high society. Even this room was still the same. Nothing had changed in all the years. But there was something here, and Carcel was convinced of it. Something that could explain the change in her feelings. If I may say so, it's a clue. Was it possible that the reason was that she was uncomfortable because their bodies had changed? Or did it all happen before he entered the military academy? No, even when disapproving looks were thrown at Ines, she always acted so coldly accurate. At least she had stopped calling him Lord like she had last time. Thought something in this room had clearly changed. Not even that shapeless funeral dress could hide the fact that her body's newfound maturity was beautiful. The girl noticed that he was thinking about obscenities again, though for him that would be his only pleasure. Carcel asked why she was not interested in him. But there was no hidden meaning here, so he could care less. Clearly that wasn't the best answer. Ines explained that she had only given it to make him feel better. She said that she knew all about his personal adventures, that he didn't need to worry about her, and so Carcel was free to do whatever he wanted. It all made sense now. He had upset her, and that was why his fiancée was being so sarcastic, even though she had no idea what Carcel was talking about. Lord tried to explain that either that was the case, or she had said those words without actually putting that meaning in. It even seemed to him that Ines was concerned about his feelings. The guy himself didn't realize he was talking nonsense. He acted as if the girl had found another man or something like that. Carcel even asked if that was the case, and the answer was not unequivocal. Ines was nobody's desired quiet girl, just as his cousin had once said, the crow of the house of Valestena. However, the reason men hovered around her was because she already had an extremely attractive fiancé. Ines always dressed similarly, so it was no wonder she remained in the shadows. In a sea of lively birds, the heroine stood out like a crow, but with a body like that, she could win over even the silliest nobleman. But the truth is what she is. Carcel couldn't say that she was beautiful just because of her body. The girl declared that women were interested in him because her looks were much less threatening compared to his. She had no complaints about this marriage or him. Nor was there any point in ruining their relationship over such nonsense. He was born to be her husband. It seemed to the man that she was not all right in her mind, though Ines was more than sane. She knew exactly what jealousy was like, and she also knew how to be angry, as well as how to feel affection. That's why the protagonist threatened to kill him if he betrayed her. That was what her love for the man made her, and for that reason she didn't want to waste her energy on someone like him. Someone she didn't even like. There was something else Carcel wished to say to her, but she had had enough. He grabbed her arm insolently, demanding that she listen to him. Ines continued to refuse, causing his anger and irritation to grow. Though the Lord himself didn't understand why he was doing this, or why he was holding her wrist. And how had things gotten so dramatic? Tears began to stream down her face. What was she supposed to think? How was she supposed to understand his relationship with that woman? Carcel froze like a stone, repeating her words in his head. What really surprised him was the expression on his fiancé's face. He put his arm around her shoulders, reassuring her that nothing had happened between them. That couldn't be true. The man pulled her against him, holding deep eye contact and calling her the only one who mattered to him. Carcel himself couldn't believe he had said it. Ines continued to cry, forcing herself not to believe his words. His strong arms pushed her body against his until they both felt something. The protagonist pulled away sharply, trying to break free from his tenacious grasp. She was not willing to take any more of these insults. Now, in her eyes, the groom was horrible and disgusting, but even now this lecture kept her close to him. How it hurt him. Ines switched to abusive language, but according to him, his body wouldn't have reacted that way if there had been another in his arms. She was the only one that caused such a reaction in him. Now there was a need to end it all. Carcel had told her his secret. He felt this way, only toward her. There was a long silence in the room. The man mentioned that he would let her go if she trusted him. In that case, what could Ines do? Her dark curls flowed down her narrow shoulders, which became bare in an instant. Lord had only to show how much he desired her. The girl never wore underwear when she went to meet him, each time hoping that one day he would take her into his arms and get to know her body more intimately. She had waited so long for this, that it seemed like a dream now, just a harmless dream without suffering or sorrow. A dream in which Ines is exposed and so he would never want to wake up from it. Except it all turned out to be fiction. He was awakened by his little copy, which reminded his brother of sparring. The man thought back to her words. Now he was convinced he could live the life he wanted to live. Because his fiancée didn't care one bit, and come to think of it, Carcel also blamed her for today's incident. In fact, the Lord was even glad that it came out this way, and he seemed to have become the happiest person in the world. The captain, as he was addressed, had been repeating the same words since his arrival, constantly referring to his chastity. The man had simply never heard Carcel speak so much, which meant he was satisfied with what she had told him. He should have made for a long tongue, however, because the bullet was moving very fast. He didn't even know how to shoot properly and he was already criticizing his captain. In fact, the guy envied the Lord. That is, it was every man's dream. Namely, a wife who didn't restrain her husband. When a man gets married, he will be forced to live under the constant supervision of his partner. That's when they cease to be free. Did he really think Carcel was such a scumbag? All the man said was that he was lucky to have as a bride such a caring and kind lady who was willing to let her husband live the life he wanted. Except that, in the Lord's own opinion, this woman showed no care for him. In fact, Inez didn't give a damn about him. That is why she will be fine whatever Carcel does. Once again, the captain was approached by a lady who was only too glad for his long vacation. She was thrilled to be able to watch him all summer. God had endowed Carcel with a beautiful face and such a strong and perfect body, which made the girl envy his bride. And only he was able to turn her on like that. For some reason, the man froze and suddenly asked this lady to move away from him. Of course, she was returning, because this night he was to be hers, but the Lord still left her alone. There was some nonsense going on in his head. Escalante had thought that those speeches were more than just nonsense, but now he had doubts. The words spoken in his dream had no power over him. So why was this happening? Why didn't Carcel get excited being with such a lady? After the wedding, he wouldn't have any other options besides ends, so he shouldn't be deprived of doing this. It must be some kind of curse, or maybe it's just a temporary malfunction. Lord believed that he had zero chance at that age of fitting in as impotent. Now he tried to reassure himself, but that very night, as soon as he thought of Ines, the problem resolved itself. That's how his self-belief worked. It was alright because Ines wouldn't have to go tonight anyway. How wrong Carcel had been. The bride apologized for being late, but the man was at a loss for words. The girl practically did not show up at such events, even despite the invitations. While everyone was whispering about her, Ines knew that her fiancé would show up here. Her bare hand touched his tense cheek. She asked him not to make such a facial expression, which was devoid of any nobility, in public. Who was responsible for it, though? An awkwardness hung between them. The silence was interrupted by the protagonist, who apologized for the incident. She wasn't quite sure she knew the reason, but it seemed that what had happened had thrown him off balance a bit. Had Ines really come here to see him at a different time? Though the girl didn't think a separate reason was necessary for a simple meeting. Had she upset him again? Her excessive politeness was unnecessary, for Carcel found it both an inconvenience and a cause for concern. Ines leaned closer, sensing how irritable he was today. Such proximity made the man flush and blush. But she noticed that, as of late, the Lord had been acting awfully strange. By the time Carcel came to his senses, he was already in the carriage. It even seemed to his fiancée that the guy was somehow unhinged. However, the Lord himself did not understand why he behaved like that. After all, he did not consider himself some kind of pervert or a teenager with raging hormones. It's even suggested that he get out of the carriage if he came to his senses, especially when they were already at his house. The girl made a displeased look on her face as she mentioned that they were going to the Escalante residence. The need to see her was not something that pleased him too much. The protagonist understood that, but if her fiancé continued to behave like this, it would turn into a problem for her as well. But she was well aware that he didn't think she was annoying. Carcel helped her out of the carriage, after which Ines leaned on his arm, which was a very painful torture for him. He sat her down across from him, which made her feel the space was too open for conversation. They had something personal to discuss, but the man felt this room was private enough so they could begin. The last time Carcel had left in such a hurry that it had not been possible to finish the conversation there, though he himself had denied it. Ines appreciated the effort her fiancé had made to hide the truth from her. In particular, she spoke of his efforts to keep his salacious lifestyle a secret. She knew he was doing it out of respect for her. Carcel had decided to keep his mouth shut since the blame was on him. He was now convinced that the bride was crazy about him, except she wasn't done yet. What the protagonist meant was that he didn't need to worry and hide who he was dating, because she had no interest in him, just like he had no interest in her. For the remainder of the engagement, they can just keep it that way and stay out of each other's personal lives, and then stick to that after the wedding. As long as no one disrespects the other outright, they will indulge each other and stay out of personal matters. Carcel tried to make sure that what he heard was correct and as if asking for permission to do whatever he wanted on his own time. As if the girl intended to do something behind his back. He jumped up and moved closer to her, sitting down on the table. Inez reminded him that people don't behave that way. However, the guy defiantly replied that he wouldn't be a toad by sitting on the table. Carcel explained that before calling him a child, Then she should have thought about what nonsense she was talking about. It appeared that Ines had put on this whole show for the sake of her lover. He asked her that question again, for it would explain everything. Why she didn't care about his misdeeds, why she let him do whatever he wanted, and why she went so far. Who knows, it might have been more than one man. Escalante couldn't imagine how many men the protagonist could seduce with her porcelain skin and sensual body. Given her personality and the way she commanded, the girl could definitely take control of anyone. But after the wedding, Ines refuted his speculation. The only reason she suggested it was to make things easier for him. She wanted the groom to be free. After all, his life had changed because of her. Carcel had caved into her without wanting it to. He had to become heir to the house again because of her. They should have gotten married 6 more years ago, but Carcel had enrolled in the military academy, only to postpone the wedding. By doing so, though, he'd only done her a favor. It wasn't that Ines hated him. It was just that it hurt to postpone the wedding. She was sure it meant nothing to him. It was that phrase that caused him to have an internal contradiction. It's in her eyes. Carcel boarded a warship and went into battle only to postpone a life together with his nun-like fiancée. There was no point. His heart began to beat rapidly, for there definitely had to be some ulterior motive here. Over the past 17 years, the man had seen her from all sides. But she was only going to be his wife, in fact, going to lead her life apart from him. Carcel practically nestled into her face, looking into her eyes, summarizing all of her words. Did she really think that was possible? Escalante reached up to kiss her, causing her hands to shake. Hadn't the girl said they should have children? What about sharing in the process of conceiving them? He was sorry to ruin her plans, but they would not live apart. She would have to kiss him hundreds of times and their bodies would meet thousands of times. Carcel had promised not to lay a finger on any other woman, being by her side when she gave birth to her firstborn, and then the next. And even if they don't make babies, he will make sure that he will satisfy her. He would make sure his wife would do the opposite, because he didn't want his so-called freedom or privacy. His understanding of marriage ruled that out. Even though the protagonist thought he was a disgusting bastard, even so he was more faithful than Ines.